Hi guys, my name is Lisa. I'm the founder of Changa Institute, one of the first schools that's fully licensed and based in Oregon. We train psilocybin facilitators, and our students became the first legal psilocybin facilitators in the whole country. We have Courtney here and Sean, and we'll be talking about Colorado and Oregon legalization.
Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Barnes. I am an attorney at Feldman Legal Advisors, and I've been in the sort of cannabis and psychedelics drug policy reform space for about 7 or 8 years now. I've had the pleasure of working with Sean for many years, who will introduce herself in just a moment. But yeah, I mean, we were so excited to just have a full woman panel that I think we're just gonna have a conversation. We're all sort of doing different things in the space, and there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Oregon and Colorado. So yeah, come have some fun with us.
Yeah, questions are great.
And hi, I'm Sean Hauser. I'm a partner at the law firm Vicente. We specialize in cannabis and psychedelics law and policy. I've been in the space for about 15 years and have had the privilege of working on the cannabis and psychedelics laws in Colorado as far as the drafting and passage and implementation, and are focused on that now with respect to the Natural Health Medicine Act in Colorado. And I'm thrilled to be here. I think it's a really critical time of evolution in the industry and a great time to be having these discussions. So definitely feel free to ask us questions. We're going to go through kind of the lay of the land in Oregon and Colorado from 3 of our different perspectives here.
Yeah, and I think before we jump into this conversation, I wanted to ask Courtney to give us overview of what's happening in the United States on a legislation level with legalization of psychedelics, and maybe a little bit about California as well.
Sure. So I think, who all in the audience currently works in psychedelics? Okay. Who has had experience with psychedelics? Okay. All right, well then, so we're a pretty well-rounded group, but since I'm a lawyer and this is what I do for a living, I'll give you guys sort of a one-on-one on where we're at with drug policy reform in the United States. So, put very simply, controlled substances, drugs, your psychedelic compounds as we know them, are all classified as Schedule I controlled substances in America, both under federal and almost every state law. And this means that the federal government classifies psychedelics as having a high potential for abuse, no currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States, and a lack of accepted safety for use under medical supervision. So essentially, highly addictive, no medical value. We all know that's just blatantly not true, but that's the world we live in, and that's the work that Sean and I do, is trying to help reform these laws. So there's the Federal Controlled Substances Act and the State Level Controlled Substances Act. Every state has adopted their own version of the CSA. And as I mentioned, virtually every state continues to classify psychedelics as Schedule I substances too. That said, we've been undergoing a policy reform movement across the United States, both at the local and state level, since 2019, with Denver passing the first decriminalization of mushrooms ordinance in the United States. So Colorado's been a first mover on a few different fronts, but Denver was the leading city for passing psychedelics policy reform. We now have 2 states, Oregon and Colorado, which Sean and Lisa will talk about in more detail, that have passed regulated access models for initially psilocybin, but in Colorado, the potential for adding additional psychedelic compounds. And we have 25 plus cities across the country that have passed local deprioritization measures. So this means that in the city, the town policy is that it's the lowest law enforcement priority to arrest individuals for engaging in non-commercial use, possession, cultivation, and sharing of natural psychedelic compounds. So you can still technically get arrested, it's just lowest law enforcement priority, but that's really where we're seeing this grassroots movement take off. And as I mentioned, since Denver passed in 2019, we now have over 20 5 cities or so, with Portland, Maine being the most recent. So I mean, talking about first movers and sort of trailblazing, Lisa, you were the first ever facilitation program to get licensed in Oregon, weren't you?
Yes, we are the first
Yeah, give her a round of
ever.
applause.
And it definitely been a journey for us to set the practice together and set the high bar, because we knew that all other states will be watching, and it's up to us to create a program that works and can be replicated and applied in different states like Colorado. And I was very fortunate to bring amazing people to our team from NYU Psychedelic Research Center and Johns Hopkins University, who's currently teaching the program. But there's definitely a lot of work that was put into the program.
And Sean, can you give us an overview of what is a facilitation education program? You guys are creating those in Oregon now, in Colorado now. Tell us a little bit of what does that mean?
Sure, no, and that's actually something that is currently the subject of rulemaking right now, and we're looking to Oregon to determine what training should be required for facilitators. Should there be exceptions and different training for, indigenous healers who have had experience for decades? What level of training should be required for, working with someone with mental illness versus, working with someone that's coming for, a different type of experience, more for wellness. And we're looking at, what duration, what cost, what type of programs are both cost effective and give facilitators the training that they need to truly help people, which was the intent of the law. And to your question, in Colorado, in addition to establishing a personal use and decriminalizing the use of natural medicines, the state established a regulated model where there's licensed healing centers where a licensed facilitator who is under the purview of the Department of Regulatory Agencies, who licenses therapists and other professional licensees, will administer healing sessions, and that will include an administration session, a preparation session, an administration session, and integration sessions. And that person will be licensed, will at most times likely be operating in a licensed healing center where you can only use the medicine in that center. They may allow some permissibility for them to go to homes or care facilities. And what licensure is required of a facilitator at these certain levels is currently being debated by the regulatory agencies, the Natural Medicine Advisory Board, and different stakeholders. And they want to be sure we have a cost-effective program, that it's not so cost-prohibitive for facilitators to get licensed, that good people who are experienced don't enter the space. We also want it to be cost-effective for those seeking treatment, but we also want to be sure there's enough training and the appropriate licensure for different types of folks. And that may be different for someone who has schizophrenia or a condition where there might be contraindications, or where a medical degree is needed, versus others who aren't. And then there's basic requirements like just certain number of hours of training. We're looking at 120 hours. I forget. Oregon.
120 hours in Oregon as well.
Yeah.
And for those who don't live in Colorado and Oregon, this essentially is for people to come to a licensed healing center and have a psilocybin, like a psychedelic journey, under the supervision of someone who is trained by the state. So this is like a whole new paradigm. People have been using psychedelics for thousands of years in ceremony and for religious purposes. But now here in Colorado and Oregon, you can actually go to a state-regulated treatment center and sit with a licensed facilitator, and they would be your trip sitter, in essence, for you to have your psychedelic journey. So yeah, Colorado's creating that system, and you are the first, you've created the education program. So this is also a totally new thing where you create essentially a school for people to learn how to provide that facilitation or supervisory service. And it's got topics on everything, but from like ethics to history of use. What are some of the things you teach?
Ethics is one of the most important part in psychedelic administration and often overseen and not represented in educational programs. But our particular program covers 9 modules, And it goes from social equity, which is really important when working with psychedelics and people that went through traumatic experiences in their life. And it goes all the way through administration, integration, facilitation, and group experiences. So we provide a wide range of knowledge to our students, not only that comes from Western world, but also indigenous communities. And that's something that's important to us. And now being in that field, I understand how important the training for not only licensed facilitators that planning to work in states like Oregon and Colorado, but people that opening a lot of churches. I've been at the different conference, and every third person now comes up and saying, I have a church, and we administer ayahuasca and other different plant medicines. And often I find that the way they run those practices are not in integrity with plant medicine or any communities, and they have zero training, and that can potentially cause a lot of harm and damage to people that already have harm and damage happen to them. And I also wanted to mention something about Oregon in particular. A lot of people thinking, well, Oregon legalized psychedelics, so I might go and buy them at the dispensary, where in Oregon, and I'm sure in Colorado as well, people cannot just go to a dispensary. They're not available for sale like that and home consumption. You have to consume psilocybin in a highly controlled and guided setting in a service center.
Yeah, tell us about the big difference between Colorado and Oregon when it comes to the personal use. And, Colorado passed a really broad decriminalization measure in addition to an access model, which is really groundbreaking. But what does that do? No dispensaries, but still pretty incredible.
In addition to the regulated model, the Colorado law allows for personal and spiritual use. So you can, grow mushrooms, share them, provide harm reduction services, and as long as there's no, commercial or business purpose or activity, that activity is protected. It can't be criminalized. There are certain rules around it. You have to, if you're going to grow natural medicines at your home, it has to be in a 12 by 12 space. It's enclosed. You can't consume openly and publicly. But the idea is that personal use, shouldn't be criminalized, and that any, commercial regulated use, will be regulated. And there's also exceptions for, spiritual use. So the law will allow for, the traditional kind of ceremony where, a healer who's not a licensed facilitator is, sharing medicine and working in a traditional setting, and that kind of sharing, education, that kind of experience is legal, as long as there's no payment for the actual medicine, as long as that person isn't holding themselves out as a licensed facilitator. And so that'll be an interesting and different model to watch in Colorado when there's both models, what will draw people to the regulated model versus the spiritual model. And I think for, different people going through different experiences, having both options is really important, and having, maybe different options at different times in life is useful. And, there might be times when you need to work with a licensed facilitator or one of these licensed facilitators who also has a degree in psychotherapy or a degree in psychiatry. And there might be other times when the spiritual community setting, might be what someone needs. So having the space for both, and importantly, not criminalizing both, was part of the, the fundamental intent of Colorado law. And
I just think it's absolutely incredible that through these voter initiatives, I mean, in Colorado, it's 3 cannabis plants that are flowering, or 6 total. And now in Colorado, you can have a 12 by 12 foot cultivation site for not just psilocybin, but mescaline and DMT producing compounds as well. Just amazing what voters can do. And I know you started in cannabis, right? So what are some of the biggest differences as a business operator you've experienced, working in cannabis, which is also highly regulated at the state level, to creating a program for a, similarly highly regulated compound, psilocybin? Was there a lot of crossover, or was it totally different?
I think it's slightly different. Cannabis is highly scalable, where psychedelics is not as scalable, especially for growers. One grower can supply the entire state with mushrooms, and I think that can potentially create a lot of setbacks for industry players, especially on the production side. And what I learned from cannabis, being one of the pioneers, starting my first grow back in 2012, I learned that with psychedelics, we all have to work together in order for this industry to thrive and succeed and become federally legal. In cannabis, everyone kind of was working against of each other, trying to make money and take over your competitor. And that's why we're still where we are right now with cannabis being federally legal. So I think just like Mycelium Network, we have to support each other in psychedelic world and uplift and work together for this industry to grow.
Totally. You mentioned scalable, and it's important to understand that where, at a cannabis dispensary, you can go make your purchase in, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes, buy up to 2 ounces of cannabis product and leave, and you can cycle through hundreds of customers in a day. At these psilocybin service centers, you're there pretty much one-on-one. There is the structure for group treatments to happen, but that's 4 to 6 hours. So maybe the same facilitator could work with 2 people in a day. If it's one, there's not the same opportunity for take-home sales.
Yeah, in general, one facilitator works with only one client a day. It's highly time-consuming practice. There's a huge demand. My students, since they became the first licensed facilitators, they opened also first licensed service centers in the state of Oregon, and all of them are booked through at least next spring. It was appointments back-to-back and people flying from all over the world, not only country, to receive those treatments. So I think legalization plays a big factor because a lot of people were afraid of these medicines being illegal, so they didn't want to touch it. And now they're bringing their kids, their family members for treatments, and that's really empowering to see that lives can be transformed and people can get some hope in addressing their mental health issues.
I think there's 20 or so treatment centers that have been licensed, and then Colorado is, what's your timeline?
And we should have licenses in 2025. We're in rulemaking now. There'll be, rulemaking hearings in March, hopefully final rules at the end of May, and then we'll see, hopefully licensed facilities in 2025. And it's, we're learning a lot from Oregon. I'd be interested to know, what your perspective is on how to make the programs cost effective, both for the operators and for patients, because one of the concerns in Colorado was obviously having a sustainable program, but also one that people are going to access instead of the personal use.
I think the market is fairly big and continue growing, and there's opportunity for everyone to actually stay profitable and continue working and helping other people. There are service centers that offering treatments for about $15,000 per session. And there are service centers that offering sessions for $800 a session. So there is a wide range of offerings, and all of them are booked and their clients for every single service center.
Awesome. At least there's a lot of demand for it. I know that was a big concern with it being so expensive relatively to access. At least they're all booked out, and yeah. I know that there's a lot of applicants still in process too.
Yeah, there are lots of applicants and people waiting to get the service centers open. The average cost of a session is about $2,500, and it lasts about 6 hours, and that includes preparation and a basic session of integration, and then you can add more integration to your sessions. But Courtney, I have a question to you about California. There's also a lot of being happening in California, and what's the future with legalization there?
Yeah, that's... So California, we were working on a bill since 2021, probably earlier really, but it was introduced in 2021, which would have decriminalized your natural psychedelic compounds. Senate Bill 519, as originally introduced, included ketamine, LSD, and MDMA, It was a very progressive legislative bill. So Colorado and Oregon both passed their decriminalization differences, but as well as access models through voter initiatives, which not every state in the country has. So there's only about 23 or so states that even have a voter initiative process, which is a whole other conversation. But so California actually became the first state in the country to pass a psychedelics decriminalization bill through both chambers of the legislature. By the time it got to this past session, it was much watered down. There were possession limitations. It did not include ketamine, MDMA, or LSD, but it would have decriminalized up to an ounce of mushrooms, 4 grams of mescaline, and I think a gram of DMT. However, the California governor vetoed it, and Governor Newsom, has his eyes on higher office. California is a massive state, so while we think, everyone I know loves mushrooms in California, and it seems like it would be a no-brainer, there is a much bigger dialogue going on for the state of California and what's in its best interest. But there's 2 ballot measures. One just withdrew, and then there's still a psilocybin ballot measure being, in the process of signature gathering. As you can imagine, California is a massive state, and the signature gathering requirements are pretty substantial, so it remains to be seen what happens. But we're seeing, there was over about a dozen states that introduced legislation this year on psychedelics. And Sean, what are some of the other states that you guys have been working on? I think Massachusetts as well?
Yeah, Massachusetts is a promising state, especially with kind of the caliber of medical institutions there. So it's possible there's progress in Massachusetts. There's a number of states that are looking at just supporting research, which I think can't be underestimated. And we need research and studies to inform the safety and efficacy of doses and product forms, and to equip facilitators, with the tools they need to, help folks. And one of the differences with cannabis and psychedelics is because of Schedule 1. And the way cannabis research laws were designed specifically, research was really blocked in cannabis for so many years, and a lot of the psychedelics have had much more progress with breakthrough therapies and FDA clinical trials. So we, will likely see a descheduling of some substances next year, potentially MDMA, with MAPS trial in 2024 being finalized. And that will, start to be the unlocking of things like insurance and, getting more states on board. So I think states, looking at research bills, and even, my home state of Texas passed a research law years ago, something I think I could see Florida doing. But yeah, there were some other northeastern states that were looking at it. Not a lot, always moves in legislatures, but Massachusetts could be one to watch.
Yeah, and honestly, to go back to California, it is really quite a monumental, achievement for the psychedelics industry to have a bill like that pass both chambers of the legislature in such an influential state. So we are at a pivotal time in this movement. There's a ton of opportunity to get involved, even at the local level. It used to just be with Denver, which was a ballot initiative as well. Then we saw all these city and town councils passing resolutions. Now we've had the mayor of Minneapolis, I believe, issue an executive order. We've seen district attorneys issue non-prosecutional policies. So if you know like a politician or a high up law enforcement member or just a city government official, it's a lot easier to get this type of policy passed than people seem to anticipate. And when you go through the local political process, it also tends to be much more affordable than running a ballot measure. But I guess we're at 5 minutes.
Yeah, let's do questions.
Oh, Christina, we'll have her come bring the mic, or we can bring you one as well.
Hi. Thank you all. I have tons of questions, but I'm only going to ask one for Lisa. Some proponents of the medical model will turn their noses up and say, oh, well, if you're a licensed therapist and now you're a licensed facilitator in Oregon, you can't practice therapy. So I'll say, well, they don't sit there and twiddle their thumbs. But give me a better answer.
Why outside residency?
What your facilitators do if they can't practice their licensed psychotherapy during a psilocybin session, what do they actually do?
Well, I think psychotherapy is not the right time for session itself. It's great for after. And during the administration session, you want the client to actually go inward and go through the experience on themselves and let the inner healer turn on and help the client to heal from their trauma. And psychotherapy can come during the integration process. And for that, you don't have to be a facilitator. And I think psychotherapists can be highly effective working with people who went through the session. But I think it's also going to be very expensive for psychotherapists to sit with a client for 6 hours, where the most experiences happen under the blanket in an absolutely quiet room. And you don't want to go and start messing with their subconsciousness while they going through the experience as well. So I would recommend for psychotherapists look into integration practice.
Next question? Yes, here we go.
Hi. Oh, God. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. Is there anything you could suggest that could be helpful to do in a conservative state like that where, I mean, it's hard to say if even cannabis might be legal anytime soon. I'm a family practitioner. I work in telemedicine.
I would say, education and just engagement, like Courtney was mentioning. I think, especially in conservative states and everywhere, veterans are often a great voice because their experiences are very real. They're heard, on both sides of the aisle, and they've been just like on the front lines, in general, on the front lines of this issue, really speaking to the efficacy of medicines and the ability to, maybe transition off opiates and other things, and that's usually something government is receptive to hearing. But I think, education in any way, and we're happy to share some resources, but it's, government officials, law enforcement, a lot of states have opiate settlement funds and other research funds that could support research, at the state level. So kind of looking to see what resources there are in the state. But I think, education is always the best way to start.
Next question? Going once, going twice, and here's the third.
Hi. I was just kind of curious, what does it look like inside one of those facilities where people, is it like beds? Is it like your typical psychiatric office? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, every facility looks very different. There are some facilities that look very sterile and very boring, with just one old boring sofa and some painting and a tiny, tiny room. There are also very big facilities that provide different type of experiences for the client, with bubble bath, huge living rooms, and record players where you can go for a full day journey and have fun in the space. Because clients, once they go on a journey, they cannot leave a service center for the duration of the time, depending on a dose. So from the small dose to a bigger dose, it's from 1 hour to 6 hour experience. And since that never been done before, facilitators get really crafty and creative when it comes to setting up the service centers. So there's a lot of high tech and a lot of very trippy rooms available.
Awesome. I had one other quick question. What are the doses generally? I know they're going to vary from person to person, but what is kind of your minimum dose up to your maximum for psilocybin?
So it's, I
It's
don't know this.
0.5% to 5 grams. 0.5 to 5 grams.